In the last video, we went through the history of two-wheelers in India. This video is going to be about the history of cars in independent India. Now, just as in the previous video, we need to keep in mind about the tormented history of India before independence. This video is going to be a bit longer because there's a whole lot more to cover. This is Aditya and you're watching Cars and Bikes. After independence, two-wheelers were on the rise due to their cheap price tag, ease of living with, and a cheap maintenance cost. The car industry took its time though, as before independence, cars were only imported and that too in small numbers for mostly the British and a few for the Rajas. There was no scope for the common folk to own any kind of motorized four-wheeler. But following independence in 1947, the government of India and the private sector launched efforts to create an automotive component manufacturing industry to supply to the automobile industry. In 1953, an import substitution program was launched and the import of fully built-up cars began to be restricted. In 1948, Hindustan Motors signed a deal with Morris Garages (MG) and started assembling the Morris 10 in India by early 1949. This was the first car to have an Indian brand name, which was the Hindustan 10. This had a 1.2-liter engine that developed 32 brake horsepower and had a top speed of 100 km per hour. This was a cheaper option to the large imported sedans. In 1948, Premier Automobiles was set up and they started to locally assemble Dodge motor cars by 1949. The Dodge Kingsway was one of the models that this company assembled in India. The Dodge Kingsway was built by Chrysler for the export markets and was relatively very cheap when compared to other Chrysler products from that era. It had a 6-cylinder, 3.6-liter mammoth engine. Many cars in India even now don't have such large engines. This car was sold till the late 1950s in India. Hindustan Motors also signed a deal with Studebaker Motors of America and assembled the Studebaker Champion in the country. This was a full-size sedan with a 2.8-liter 6-cylinder engine that produced around 80 brake horsepower of power. Side note, I just wanted to add that the car that my dad owns now, which I hate by the way, has around 86 horsepower. Just 6 horsepower more than a 70-year-old car. So this just makes me hate my car even more. Now moving on to the 50s, the Morris Minor replaced the Hindustan 10 and was christened as Baby Hindustan. This was an even smaller and more convenient car. It came fitted with a 918cc engine which was low on maintenance and very easy to repair. In 1951, Premier Automobiles signed a pact with Fiat and started to make a compact two-door car with a 569cc 4-cylinder engine known as the Fiat 500C. It was only produced for 3 years though, till 1954. In 1954, the Morris Oxford Series 2 or the Hindustan Landmaster was launched. This was a modern design and sported a 1.5-liter inline 4-cylinder engine. The styling was still rounded that followed the genes of the Morris Minor. However, it looked more contemporary. The Landmaster was the predecessor of the Ambassador, which went on to become one of the most popular cars in India for many years to come. The Fiat 1100 was launched in 1954. It came with an all-new design and had a 1-liter petrol engine with 35 brake horsepower. This car had a steering column mounted gear lever, which was considered fashionable in those days. It could do about 110 km of top speed and came with French suicide doors, which are the same kind of doors used in modern day Rolls-Royce models. The Fiat 1100 was the predecessor of the Fiat 1100D, which later remained in production as the Premier per Mini till the year 2000. Mahindra & Mahindra tied up with Willys Jeep for the manufacture of the CJ, civilian Jeep in India. This iconic vehicle has been under production since then and has changed many avatars under the Mahindra brand. Now it is a common misconception that Mahindra Motors copied the Willys Jeep and made the Mahindra Thar. But the truth is, Mahindra has been making these Jeeps under a license agreement with the company, which states that Mahindra can manufacture and sell these Jeeps in a few limited markets, such as India, Africa, etc. The cars launched in the 1950s were pretty much all carried over to the 60s, and almost no new cars were launched in 1960s India. Self-taught automotive expert and entrepreneur K.A.B. Menon established the long-forgotten Aravind Automobiles in 1956. And the first ever Indian car made from scratch, the classic Aravind Baby Model 3, a four-door luxury sedan, was launched. It was not paid much attention though, and the automotive permit which it applied for instead went to Maruti. Yes, the Maruti, and the company went bankrupt. But if the Indian government at that time had paid any heed to the new Indian startup, it might just have become the Indian BMW. Growth was relatively slow in the 1950s and 1960s due to the license Raj, which hampered the growth of the Indian private sector. After 1970, with restrictions on import of vehicles set, the automotive industry started to grow, but the growth was mainly driven by tractors, commercial vehicles, and scooters. Cars still remained a major luxury item. Price controls were finally lifted, inserting a competitive element into the automotive market of India. The market remained pretty stagnant though for pretty much the entire 1970s with no new significant launches. The 1980s, however, marked the arrival of some key competitors in the Indian market. The Premier 118NE and the Hindustan Motors Contessa. The Premier 118NE was also introduced in India by Premier Automobiles Limited. In 1981, Premier began the process of acquiring the production tooling for the facelifted Fiat 124D after authorization from Fiat. The model was released in the autumn of 1985 as the Premier 118NE. The Hindustan Contessa, on the other hand, was based on the Vauxhall VX series of 1976 to 1978, which was itself a development of the Vauxhall Victor FE. When introduced in 1983, the Contessa was one of the few Indian manufactured luxury cars in the market. Of the 30,487 cars built in India in 1980, all but 6 came from two main players, Hindustan Motors and Premier. Standard Motors had led a shadow existence in the latter half of the 1970s to the 1980s, producing only a handful of cars to keep their license active. In 1983, another iconic Indian car, the Maruti 800, was launched in India, under the partnership of Suzuki Motors and the then government-owned Maruti. As the name suggests, the car had a humble 800cc 3-cylinder petrol engine. It was a huge hit and marked the arrival of Suzuki in India. In 1986, to promote the auto industry, the government established the Delhi Auto Expo. The 1986 Delhi Auto Expo was a showcase for how the Indian automotive industry was absorbing new technologies, promoting indigenous research and development, and adapting these technologies for the rugged conditions of India. And of course, the off-road legend Maruti Gypsy 2 was launched in 1985 to much fanfare. The new 2020 Gypsy is being manufactured in India and exported to other Asian countries, but strangely has not yet been launched in the Indian market itself. As India began to liberalize its automotive market in 1991, a number of foreign firms also initiated joint ventures with existing Indian companies. By 2000, there were 12 large automotive companies in the Indian market, most of them offshoots of global companies. And although the Indian car market started off late than the two-wheeler market, its boom was actually a decade earlier than that of the two-wheelers. 1990 saw the introduction of many new car brands, the famous Alto, and also the first indigenous Indian car, the Tata Indica. It promised the features and practicality of the Maruti Alto for the price of a Maruti 800. This car kickstarted Tata Motors' successful campaign into the passenger car segment. It was launched in 1998 at the Geneva Motor Show and quickly became very popular with Indian audiences, getting over 1.15 lakh bookings in a matter of weeks. And over its complete lifespan, Tata sold more than 15 lakh units of this humble beloved hatchback. The Alto, on the other hand, was very successful too, and Maruti Suzuki still somehow manages to squeeze out sales from it, though its second gen is being sold in India while its third gen is being offered in other countries like Japan. The Rover Montego spoke of classiness all around. This car was launched in the 1990s, and features like power steering, power windows, and air conditioning were standard in this sedan. All this led to the price tag of Rs 10 lakhs at that time. In 1995, 236 cars were produced by the company, while in the next 15 months, only 51 were sold. There were many new car launches in the 90s, and so I am only going to mention their names and rarely give a line or two about the most important or influential ones.